Okay, we're still in the garden, and so I want to go ahead and continue on and do the last part of the bureaucracy. And we're going to talk about why sometimes the bureaucracy seems inefficient. Now, part of it we've already discussed, because one of the problems with the bureaucracy is that members of the bureaucracy are very hard to fire. So that's why when you walk into the Department of Motor Vehicles and people don't seem like they're really inspired to help you, in large part it's because you really don't. You have to do a lot to get fired from a government job. If you're a civil servant, your job is in very many ways protected, and so. But that's not the whole explanation, and I'm more interested in the sort of political sciencey question of inefficiency, thinking about the bigger issue of inefficiency. So I want to talk about two reasons why the bureaucracy is inefficient that may not have ever occurred to you. We all know what it's like to walk into the Department of Motor Vehicles and have people stare at us like we're a nuisance. So the first reason that the bureaucracy can seem inefficient is actually because they're in a very difficult spot. They actually have two bosses. Right. They have Congress as one boss and the president as another boss. So I want to talk about why each of them are bosses of the bureaucracy, why they're in charge. And let's use the example of OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, as the example. If you're somebody who works for OSHA, right, one of the things you know is that Congress was the one who wrote the laws that actually created your agency. There was some bill that Congress passed, President signed into law, but they created the agency that you work for. And that means that you're kind of responsible to them. You're beholden to them. And also they can determine what your agency is allowed to do and what it isn't allowed to do. So if you piss them off, they may go ahead and say, you know what, you're not allowed to do this anymore. And they've done that in the past where they go ahead and they place limitations on the bureaucracy because they feel that the bureaucracy is getting out of control. So you got to make sure you don't piss them off too much. But the most important reason that Congress is the boss is because they provide your funding. If you're the head of OSHA, you know that every year you're going to have to go back to Congress and say, I need more money. I need additional money for next year. And if you've pissed them off last year, guess what? They're not going to have that much money. They're going to be like, oh, it turns out I'm a little bit short here. I don't have any money. I can give you some, but I can't give you as much as you want. So you got to make sure that they're happy with what you're doing. But you also have another boss, the president. See, the people who run the agencies, right, are usually political appointees. There's the department, the secretary of the department, and then the deputy secretary, and then all the other people who are political appointees are the ones who are actually in charge. They're the ones who are giving you orders, and they're taking their orders from the president. So the president is very much your boss too. He's the one giving the orders. And so you've got Congress as a boss, you've got president as a boss, and the president as a boss, and sometimes what happens is if Congress and the president disagree, the bureaucracy just doesn't really know what to do. I mean, I was talking to one person who told me he had two bosses telling him to do different things. I say, well, what do you do when your bosses are telling you to do different things? He says, I hide. Right? I think the bureaucracy sometimes does the equivalent of hiding. They just make it look like they're trying to get stuff done. What they're really trying to do is not piss anybody off. So that's the first way that they seem inefficient. Because they have two bosses, they're sort of taking orders from different people, and imagine being in a work situation like that. That can go ahead and make it crazy. The second part is a little more interesting to me, at least as a political scientist. Because it's why the bureaucracy can be inefficient, but it doesn't have anything to do with Congress and the president. It actually has to do with civil servants themselves, the people who work in the bureaucracy year after year after year. And in particular, the civil servants who have been in a particular agency or worked for a department for many, many years, so that among the civil servants, they're sort of the ones at the very top. And this is the way it works. Remember I told you before, it's very hard to fire civil servants, and especially somebody who's been there for years and years and years. They're really hard to fire. Well, I also told you earlier in this lecture that political appointees, how long do they last in their jobs? If you recall, they last a couple years, 2 or 3 years. And so if you're a guy who's been working in the Department of Labor, right, for 30 years, you've gone ahead and seen people come in every time, every 2 years, every 3 years, someone comes in and says, we're going to be doing things very differently now here at the Department of Labor. And you're like, whatever, dude. Yeah, that's fine. And they tell you what you're supposed to do, and you tell them all the reasons you can't, and they give you an order anyways. And so you say, okay, you know what? I'm going to get on that right away. But first, the water bottles need to be filled. The water cooler needs to be filled up. I'll get right back on that. Then I have to go find where the staplers are because it appears we're out of staplers, and then somebody ordered the wrong kind of stapler, so we'll have to go. You just start creating obstructions and make it hard for them to get anything done. Now, it's not as stupid as water bottles, but what you do is you just slow walk everything. And you just wait, because you know if you wait a year or 2 or 3, what's going to happen? They're going to be gone. And then somebody new will come in. And, if they're going to try and change everything, we're going to be doing things very differently here on the bureaucracy now. It's like, yeah, right. Everybody says that. No, we're not. And then you just slow walk it again. That's a problem. Do you remember when we talked about the presidency, one of the things I said was that the presidential power is the power to persuade. The power to persuade. That's one perfect example of that. If a president wants to get things done in the bureaucracy, it is not simply the case that he can just give the department secretary an order. The department secretary will give the deputy secretary an order. They'll give their political appointees an order, and then everybody will fall in line. It just doesn't happen that way. That's not the real world. So for a president to be powerful, they have to be able to persuade. They have to be able to go ahead and convince the bureaucracy and people in an agency that what the president wants done is actually in their own benefit. And that's why, even though the Constitution has remained basically unchanged from president to president to president to president, we have some really powerful presidents who get a lot done, and we have some presidents who look kind of weak and don't get much done. Part of that is because presidential power, with the president at the top of the bureaucracy, presidential power isn't something that you can find in the Constitution. It has to do with personality. It has to do with persuasiveness. That's why you can have Reagan one year, very powerful, very forceful. President Bush, not so much. They're both working on the same Constitution. President Bush Sr., by the way. They're both working under the same rules, under the same Constitution. But the difference is that sort of intangible thing that makes a president powerful, the ability to persuade. Presidential power is the power to persuade. So that's the end discussion of the bureaucracy, and I'll see you on another video. And for now, I'll just let you take a look at my garden. I wish I had garden music. There we go. By the way, you can just turn this off now. I'm just showing you my garden because I want to. But there are onions over there, right? 2 rows of onions. And then next to that, there's 2 rows of kale. And then next to that, there's tomatoes and chard. And my daughter's over there looking at me. She can't believe I'm doing this. And at the very front, if you can see right at the very front there, at the edge of the brick wall, we planted strawberries too. And that's just one of the beds. There's actually 2 other beds, 3 other beds. So very cool. We're done with the bureaucracy. I'm back in the, it looks like I'm back in the witness protection program. Bye.